Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive on 1984 by George Orwell. We're going to be exploring this dystopian world, trying to understand the themes and the characters.
Well, I think one of the things that's really interesting about 1984 is it's a book that just seems to speak to every generation.
Right.
It's like Orwell had this incredible ability to tap into those anxieties about control and surveillance and manipulation of truth.
It's like he had a crystal ball, right? Like he
Yeah.
saw the future in some ways. And one of the most striking things is obviously that setting of Oceania, this totalitarian superstate. You've got Big Brother watching over everything. What's it like to live in a world where telescreens are everywhere, constantly monitoring your every move?
I mean, it's a world built on fear,
Mm-hmm.
and Orwell does such a fantastic job with imagery.
Right.
Like clocks striking 13.
Yes.
The smell of like boiled cabbage and old rag mats. You could practically smell it.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And then, of course, Big Brother's face just everywhere, those piercing eyes following you. It really creates this sense of oppression.
Oh, absolutely. It's almost claustrophobic the way he describes it. There's no escape. And then we have Winston Smith, our protagonist, who's actually brave enough to kind of push back against this, to rebel in little ways. He's just an ordinary guy, a low-ranking party member. But starting a diary is a huge act of defiance.
Absolutely. I mean, in a world where independent thought is dangerous, that diary becomes this symbol of his attempt to reclaim his own narrative.
Yeah.
It's like he's saying, I'm still here, I still exist. It's pretty powerful.
It is. And it's not just the diary, right? He's also grappling with this whole manipulation of history.
Yeah.
The way that the party constantly rewrites the past. He remembers holding a photograph that proved the party lied about something, but he can't even trust his own memory anymore.
Yeah. And that's doublethink, isn't it? Holding two contradictory beliefs at the same time and believing both. The party has basically ingrained this in the minds of the citizens so they doubt themselves.
It's like gaslighting, like on a societal level. It's crazy. And then you have Crime Stop, this whole concept of stopping yourself from even thinking a dangerous thought, like extreme self-censorship almost.
Yeah, it's like Orwell is saying, this is how you control a population, control their thought.
Exactly. And he gives such vivid examples of how they do this, like that slogan, war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength.
So messed up, right? I mean, it's like, how can you argue with that? It's just presented as truth.
Right. It just shows you how they've twisted logic and reason to their own ends. But in all this bleakness, there is a glimmer of hope, and that comes in the form of Julia, Winston's love interest. She appears carefree, but underneath there's this rebellious spirit, and their affair becomes this act of defiance.
Right. It's like pushing back against the party's control over personal relationships. It's saying, you can't dictate who we love, how we feel.
Yes. And she has that great line, the clever thing was to break the rules and stay alive all the same.
Totally. But their rebellion comes at a cost, as we know.
Oh, absolutely. We know how this story goes. The party's grip is relentless. Even the proles who live outside the party structure, they're not immune to it.
Right. Like even in their world, there's this underlying sense of fear and control.
Yeah. Winston initially sees the proles as this potential force for change, for revolution. He thinks they're the ones who can overthrow the party. But then he starts to question that, to wonder if they even have the will or the awareness to rise up.
It's like their lives are just about basic survival, so they don't have the time or energy to think about rebellion. It's a really tough question that the book poses, like, is ignorance bliss, as the party claims? Or does true freedom actually require more awareness, more critical thinking?
Yeah. And that question kind of hangs over the whole novel, doesn't it? And then, of course, we have the mysterious Brotherhood, this rumored organization that's supposedly fighting against the party. Winston clings to that hope that there are others out there like him.
Yeah. And then he meets O'Brien, this high-ranking party member. Winston becomes convinced that O'Brien is part of the Brotherhood.
That moment during the 2 minutes hate, when Winston thinks he sees a flicker of recognition in O'Brien's eyes. It's like a beacon of hope. But is it real? Or is it just another illusion?
Right. Like, is the Brotherhood even real? Or is it a trap set by the party to catch people like Winston? Orwell keeps us guessing the whole time.
Exactly. You never know who to trust in this world. And as Winston and Julia get deeper into their affair, they try to find safety, a little haven in that room above Mr. Charrington's shop. They think they're finally free.
But of course, it's all an illusion.
The capture scene, so brutal.
The boots of the thought police, the iron on their boots.
Yeah.
The sound of it. The truncheons, and that chilling voice coming from the hidden telescreen. Just terrifying.
And the realization that Mr. Charrington, this seemingly harmless old man, is actually a member of the thought police. Talk about betrayal.
It's a reminder that the party is everywhere. They have eyes and ears everywhere. No one is safe. And for Winston, this is just the beginning of a whole new nightmare. She's taken to the Ministry of Love, which is, of course, the opposite of love.
Yeah, this is where the party's cruelty is truly on display. They're going to try to break him to make him conform. And looming over everything is Room 101, this place where they confront you with your deepest fears.
But before we get into all that, we have to talk about Winston's betrayal of Julia, because that's a turning point in the story. It's his breaking point.
Right. He's facing his worst nightmare in Room 101, and he screams, "Do it to Julia, not me." Just devastating. The ultimate act of self-preservation, but also the complete defeat of his humanity.
And it shows just how powerful the party is. They can crush not just individual resistance, but also the bonds of love. They turn Winston against the one person who gave him hope, and in doing so, they break him completely.
It's a chilling reminder of the power of fear. But we'll get into all that and more when we continue our deep dive in the next part. It's just heartbreaking to see him like that. Well, Winston, I mean. He goes from this defiant rebel to a complete shell of a man. It really makes you think, like, how much can one person take before they just snap?
Well, it shows you how effective the party is, at really getting inside your head. They know how to use fear. They're masters of it.
Yeah.
But before we get into the really dark stuff, the torture and all that, it might be helpful to look back at some of the things that led up to Winston's capture, like those little cracks in his armor, that the party was able to exploit.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, remember how desperate he was to find someone else who was against Big Brother? Anyone. He thought he found that in O'Brien, that high-ranking party member, especially after that look they exchanged during the 2 minutes 8.
Yeah, that moment, that brief glance, that was huge for Winston. It gave him this sense that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for resistance. Like a little seed,
A little seed of rebellion planted in his mind. And it's not just O'Brien, right? Think about how he sees Julia at first. The woman who will become his lover. He's totally dismissive of her. Sees her as just another mindless follower of the party.
Yeah, pretty ironic, huh? Given how passionate their affair becomes.
Yeah.
But it shows you how deceptive appearances can be in Oceania. Everyone's wearing a mask. You never really know what's going on underneath.
Right, like, you could be sitting next to a thought criminal and never even know it, and their first interaction, when she slips him that note, "I love you." Oh. Talk about a risky move. I mean, the stakes are incredibly high for both of them.
Oh, yeah. It takes a lot of courage to even attempt a connection like that in a world where any little deviation from the norm can get you vaporized.
Absolutely. I mean, their relationship becomes this incredibly powerful act of rebellion against the party, finding comfort and solace in each other.
Yeah.
Beauty, truth.
Creating their own little world of resistance, like when they rent that room above Mr. Charrington's shop, trying to carve out a little space where they can be themselves.
A little haven away from the prying eyes of Big Brother. But it's a fragile haven, right? The party is always watching. And speaking of watching, what about the proles? That whole other segment of society that lives outside the party structure? Winston initially sees hope in them, remembers that line from his diary. If there is hope, it lies in the proles.
Yeah, he sees them as this untainted force. Like they haven't been corrupted by the party's ideology. They're still connected to those basic human instincts. Yeah. Like that scene with the prole woman singing in the courtyard.
Oh, I love that scene. Her strength, her resilience. Winston sees her as this symbol of the enduring human spirit, something that the party can't completely crush.
And the song itself, that simple melody about lost love, it represents a freedom that the party can't control, a deeper human experience that goes beyond their narrow worldview.
Right. It's like these little glimpses of humanity, beauty, connection. That's what keeps Winston and Julia going, even though they know it could all be taken away in an instant.
And, of course, there's the book. That forbidden text written by Emmanuel Goldstein, the supposed enemy of the party. It becomes their Bible, in a way.
The moment when Winston finally gets a copy of that book from O'Brien, it's like he's finally seeing behind the curtain, understanding how the party really works.
Yeah, the book lays it all out. The principles of Ingsoc, the party's ideology, their methods of control, doublethink, the manipulation of history, perpetual warfare. It's like a blueprint for maintaining absolute power.
And it's not just some dry political analysis. It's a chillingly accurate prediction of what can happen when totalitarianism takes hold, how it crushes individual thought and creates a society of blind obedience. pretty relevant to our own times, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Orwell was way ahead of his time in understanding how technology and propaganda can be used to control people. The stuff he describes in 1984, it's happening all around us today. Surveillance, misinformation, attempts to control language. It's kind of scary when you think about it.
It really is. It makes you wonder if we're sleepwalking into our own version of Oceania, or if we can learn from Winston's story, from his mistakes and his courage, and find ways to resist these forces that are trying to control us.
That's the big question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But I think one thing is clear. Our capacity for love, for compassion, for critical thinking, those things are powerful even in the face of oppression. And we need to hold on to them.
We can't let them go. It's a reminder that we have to be active participants in our own freedom. But let's get back to Winston's journey. After his capture, he's taken to the Ministry of Love, which, of course, is anything but loving.
Yeah. This is where the party shows its true colors, their brutality. They understand that to control the mind, you have to break the body first. And they have a very systematic way of doing that.
Like his time in that prison cell, meeting other prisoners who have been broken by the party's methods. Ampleforth, Parsons, it's a chilling glimpse into what they're capable of.
It really makes you think about human nature, how people can be so cruel, especially when they think they're doing it for some greater good.
And then there's Room 101, that looming threat, the place where they confront you with your deepest fear, whatever that may be. It represents the ultimate power of the party, their ability to tap into our most primal instincts.
But before we get into the horrors of Room 101, we have to talk about that pivotal moment. Winston's betrayal of Julia. It's the ultimate test of loyalty, his breaking point.
He's facing his own personal nightmare in Room 101, and he screams, "Do it to Julia, not me!" I mean, it just rips your heart out. It's the complete surrender of his humanity.
It shows that the party can not only crush resistance, but also destroy love. They turn Winston against the one person who gave him hope, and that's how they break him, completely.
It's a chilling reminder that we are all vulnerable to that kind of manipulation. But there's another layer to it. The party understands human psychology. They know how to use our fears against us. They know that we're capable of betraying even those we love most in order to survive.
And it's not just physical torture. The party also uses language to control thought. Newspeak. Their attempt to limit language, to eliminate words and concepts that threaten their ideology.
It's like they're trying to shrink the very possibility of thought to make it impossible to even imagine rebellion.
Exactly. By controlling language, they control the boundaries of what people can think, making it harder and harder to even articulate dissent.
It's a very subtle but incredibly effective form of mind control. And it's something we need to be aware of in our own world, right? I mean, think about how language is used to manipulate us every day. In politics, in advertising, everywhere.
It's all around us. So we need to be critical thinkers. Question everything. Be aware of how our thoughts and perceptions are being shaped.
It's a reminder that the fight for freedom isn't just about resisting those big, obvious acts of oppression. It's also about defending our right to think for ourselves, to express ourselves freely, and to challenge those in power.
Well said.
You know, it's hard to imagine a more complete victory for the party than Winston just completely giving in. He goes from this defiant rebel to someone who embraces the very system that crushed him.
Yeah, and I think that transformation is what really gets to people. It makes you wonder about human resilience. Like, how much can we endure before we just break? And how easily can we be seduced into conforming?
Like, remember that scene in the Chestnut Tree Cafe? When we see Winston after he's been released, he's just sitting there sipping Victory Gin, playing chess, completely absorbed in the party's propaganda.
It's a chilling image of a man who's been totally broken,
No.
remade in the party's image.
Yeah, like they erased his old self and just implanted a new one. It's like they not only control his actions, but his thoughts and feelings, too.
Exactly. He doesn't question anything anymore. He just accepts the party's version of reality. He's become a cog in the machine.
And then to make things even more tragic, he runs into Julia again, in that same cafe. And there's nothing between them anymore. No spark, no recognition, just coldness.
The party has destroyed their love, their connection. It's like they're strangers now. Their past rebellion, their love for each other, it's all been wiped clean. All that's left is that empty love for Big Brother.
It's a really bleak ending. It leaves you with this heavy feeling. Like, what does Winston's surrender tell us about ourselves, about human nature?
Well, it's a question that's been debated for years, right? I don't think there's an easy answer. But I do think 1984 is a warning. It shows us what we stand to lose if we don't cherish our freedom, if we don't stand up for our right to think for ourselves and to challenge those in power.
Yeah. And that fight, it never really ends, does it? It's something we have to be aware of all the time. We have to be willing to question, to dissent, even when it's hard, even when it feels risky.
Exactly. We can't just blindly accept things. We have to be critical thinkers. We have to engage because, like Winston's story shows us, if we don't, we risk losing our humanity.
So after this deep dive into the world of 1984, what's your biggest takeaway? What will you be thinking about?
Well, for me, it's the importance of staying vigilant. Like really paying attention to how power works and never becoming complacent. We can't just assume that everything's okay. 1984 reminds us that freedom is precious and we have to fight for it constantly. How about you? What are you taking away from all this?
I think you summed it up perfectly. It's a reminder that the fight for freedom is never truly over. It's a fight that we all have to participate in our minds, in our hearts, in the choices we make every day. We have to choose to think critically, to speak up against injustice, and to hold on to our own individuality, and to never, ever stop connecting with each other.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into 1984. Thanks for joining us on this journey.
It's been a pleasure.
And until next time, keep those minds sharp, keep those hearts open, and keep questioning everything.